Yeah. So Tracy, thanks so much for joining us. I know we've spoken a lot just about Waymarker and the important things you're working on. Uh, the Waymarker is, for the most part, about emerging talent, emerging leadership, and just career guidance. And so I feel like your experience as a senior leader at the highest level, and especially with what you're working on now, makes you for just an awesome guest and an awesome person to learn from for the community. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited because I have actually had the opportunity to support many emerging leaders during my career. It's a passion. So when you reached out, I'm like, I'm all in. I want to pay it forward. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. The people who are listening on the podcast will have my guest intro, but if you could start with your origin, that would be awesome. So,
Yeah.
Where are you from? What were you into as a kid? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. So I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I don't reside there currently, but I lived the first 40 years of my life until a career opportunity actually is what transitioned me and my family to Carmel, Indiana, which is right outside of Indianapolis. And so, as a child, I would say, I was probably pretty geeky, pretty backwards, if anything. Did really well in school and actually loved it, So I'm a bit of an anomaly compared to like my younger brothers who don't love school and my children who are like, how could you love school? I actually loved it. I loved learning and always loved journaling and writing. So I was always kind of into learning new things, being super inquisitive, and then writing about, I guess, what my experiences were. So I was a little bit, backwards because I'm extremely introverted. So very introspective kid, I think.
I can relate. What part of Cincinnati were you from for my Cincy friends?
Oh, Cincinnati. So I grew up in Columbia Township as a child, which is right in between Madisonville and Silverton in Cincinnati, and between those two big neighborhoods. And then as I grew up, I went to school, small private high school in Indian Hill. And then when I got married, my husband and we lived in Paddock Hills, which is right outside of Bond Hill and Xavier University, very close to University of Cincinnati. So around in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Hanover, so I have a lot of friends from that area who came there as well. But I also grew up in a small town in Indiana, kind of close to the state line. So
yeah,
we were in Cincinnati a lot. In fact, I'm kind of a Bengals and Reds fan, not so much anymore, but
not so much anymore. Come on. You know what, the Reds are playing right now. My daughter is actually our oldest is watching the Reds game. So we remain loyal Reds fans and more so loyal Bengals fans, which is always challenging because the Bengals haven't been good in a really long time. But we remain big fans of Cincinnati baseball and football.
Love it. My family will be pleased to hear that. I guess speaking of that, what's Tracy doing outside of work nowadays?
Oh my gosh, you know what, Jimmy, I would say the thing that Tracy is doing outside of work is all the stuff that Tracy didn't get to do when she was so focused on her corporate career. So, I spent 31 years kind of climbing the ranks in corporate America. And when I had the opportunity to kind of step away from that and reevaluate what was next for me, I spend time on two things, the things that I love most from a career perspective and the things that I love personally, like my family. So my big endeavor most recently was to buy new bicycles for the entire family. And yesterday went biking with my daughters. And that's something that, from a time perspective, I didn't get to indulge in as frequently as I would have liked. So when you're building a career, like a lot of your listeners out there, we really kind of double down sometimes. And that can come to the exclusion of some of the things that are more personally satisfying. So I'm doing the stuff I love now,
Oh, that's awesome. and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your business and,
Yeah.
what you all do. And I'd love to hear how it began as well.
My journey into entrepreneurship wasn't planned at all. So, I was very much the corporate soldier. I literally grew up with my company. So went to my organization. I used to work for Anthem Inc., Anthem Insurance Company. It's a nationwide, large insurer. And I spent 31 years there. And I started at the entry level. And literally, I started there for tuition reimbursement. I was looking for a good benefits package where I could go to school. And it was that and more. And so I literally climbed through the ranks, completed a couple of degrees, got married, had kids, did all of that, and found myself as an executive in the company in 2019. And not at a point where I felt that I could continue to grow with the company. And so it was a difficult choice, but I pivoted away from that. And to get to the answer to your question, I wasn't thinking about being an entrepreneur. When I walked away, I was really just thinking, what could be next for me? How could I continue to have an impact in the world? And that meant doing the things that I love, which are coaching women, especially minority women, because I feel like they don't get enough love and attention and insight on career progression, but also trying to make a difference in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those were my passions. So my business was kind of born out of that. I wrote a book in 2020. So I spent the pandemic time, writing a book, and launched my book in 2021 and kind of got my business going in terms of speaking, coaching, and doing diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. So that's what I do today. I'm an unlikely entrepreneur, though, because I was a 31-year corporate soldier. And I dare say if you asked anyone who knew me back then, if they could envision Tracy being an entrepreneur, they would go, no, she's a corporate soldier, But it was born out of passion, Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think that also inspires a group of people too. I used to be a contractor at Lilly.
Yeah.
And people literally grow up inside of a company like that, like you were talking about, and they get so rewarded and comfortable in a positive sense that they're like, I could never start my own business, even though that's my dream. And so I think that's really inspirational.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm here to say if I can do it, I think anyone who is driven by purpose can make that happen as well. I mean, you're doing it, I'm doing it, but it starts with having a purpose, an impact.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of impact and these big companies, I did want to ask you, what's the main thing that companies are missing when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI?
Yeah.
What does successful DEI look like in the company?
The biggest thing that I ran into during my career, as well as with the companies I consult with, and even during my careers, I talked to others, leaders in this space, and share best practices. The thing that I noticed most often was a truly strategic perspective. And some people like to call that commitment and resources. To me, it comes down to a truly strategic perspective, and here's why. Because when we talk about organizations, small, big, us as entrepreneurs, we're thinking about the impact we want to have in the world. Bigger organizations are thinking about shareholders, they're thinking about their money. And when it comes to the things that generate that, like the marketing, the sales, the operations, there's always a strategic perspective. There's always a connection to why that organization exists. And diversity should be no different. And so a lot of times what organizations see diversity, equity, and inclusion as is something that should be done, that is the right thing to do, or if I don't do it and get engaged in the conversation, our organization will be tone deaf. I mean, think about that in the post-George Floyd world. Organizations don't want to appear tone deaf. But the biggest challenge is they've not connected it to why they even exist. So what is the mission of the organization and why does diversity, equity, and inclusion matter? Then what is the plan to get it done? And then how do we hold ourselves accountable as an organization from the top to the bottom? So it's just strategic perspective. Because when we think about sales, We answer those questions. Why is sales important to the mission of the company? What's our plan to increase sales? Who are we holding accountable for sales? We can do that. We talk about the operations, but we very rarely talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion that way. So that's the biggest challenge. So that's what I do. I consult with organizations about how do we build a strategic commitment, mission, plan, accountability.
God, so it seems like it's really about intentionality, and it's no longer this like fluffy check mark. It's like, this is a strategy that we need to execute in order to win in the marketplace.
Yes, yes. And you know what? That can be tied to doing what's right. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, that absolutely can be the grounding for it. But the challenge becomes when organizations don't tie it to their existence and why it matters as it relates to the mission here, then we know what happens when budgets get tight. The things that we can't see yielding an immediate result, like sales and marketing, they have to go. They have to get cut back. We have to stop that, you know? And that is where we lose track of diversity, equity, and inclusion, when it really needs to be filtered into everything. So you're right, it's intentionality.
Sure. With your coaching, when you're coaching minority women in particular, are there certain things that come up like commonly, like more than others?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to kind of hear about, you know, those successful outcomes.
You know, I think in coaching women overall, one of the things that I see is often the challenge is it's about what is my value and my impact to the organization. And for women of color in particular, the challenges that come along with that is they typically don't see others that look like them or that are in roles that they aspire to, because they want to be the CEO. They want to be in the C-suite or be an executive or leading something significant for the organization. But most organizations, especially the large ones, are really challenged by that. They don't have that in their leadership. So women often struggle with, what is my value? Can I have an impact here as my authentic self? And so a lot of my coaching has to do with those leaders, especially emerging leaders who are just figuring out what it means to lead and to be themselves in their leadership. Most of my coaching is about how do we connect to the authentic value you bring to any organization you go to. And the reason that's a challenge for minority women is because they don't get the signals that many people take for granted that say who they are is enough. So when you're a white male in an organization like Anthem, like I came from, most of the leaders at the highest levels and up to the CEO are white males. And so you're affirmed by that already. You know, I'm enough. White males are leading here. I see people walking down the hall that look like me. And that sends me all of the signals that I need to have confidence in myself. Well, a lot of times women, and especially women of color, don't get that. And so most of my coaching has to do with that transformation of when they dial into acknowledging and owning their value and what they bring to the table and their ability to achieve and set their own direction for their careers.
Thanks for sharing that. That's so powerful. And I think it's something that especially white men in the workplace probably don't think about.
Yeah, you know, we talk a lot, like, you know, right now the conversation very often, again, in this post George Floyd era, I don't even know if it's post George Floyd, but in this era right now, is about white privilege and, you know, what that's like. And white privilege, I try to frame that for people. It's like having a blind spot. A lot of times we don't have blind spots around things that are our normal condition. They're our situation, but yet others who come from a different perspective can see that blind spot clearly because it's not their experience. And I think especially for, you know, emerging leaders, emerging female leaders, and emerging female minority leaders, they don't have the support. You know, others don't see this as an issue. Like I said, you can be in an environment where you're not going to feel uncomfortable in corporate America because you're going to see people like you. Well, that's an affirmation. You know, we don't even acknowledge it. We don't say, yeah, I feel affirmed. But when we go into a room and we don't feel this angst, then we're good. Well, many of us are walking into the room. We're the only, right? And we're feeling like, okay, should I be here? Maybe I walked into the wrong room. You know, so we have to fight through those issues that cause us discomfort, and may cause us to be less than who we are, or to show up in a way that's not truly authentic because we're not sure that it's part of the way things are done here, or if it's even accepted. So that's a part of the journey that women and women of color go through. That's a complete and total blind spot for those that are not women or women of color. They don't see it. It's not their experience, you know? So a big part of diversity work is unpacking that, having a conversation like you and I are having, so that you can say, oh, okay, I get it. But if we don't have dialogue, we can't really address some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I talked to our mutual connection, Kathy Nestrick, Parody podcast about this a little bit, but you know, it's something I even, you know, I really did. I spent my 20s kind of intentionally trying to expand my worldview and think about these problems and address blind spots. But we had a meeting in 2020 at my old company, and it just it really rocked my world, because we had a group of employees basically just for 2 hours share their experiences. And it's like, for me, who thought he was you know, taking it seriously, to be surprised by some of their stories was like, I need to turn it up big time. And so
and you know what I appreciate, you know, about what you're doing, what Kathy's doing, is the conversation. The stories are really, really important to get in front of you know, audiences, but especially emerging leaders like the folks that you're speaking to, because they are the leaders who will be managing and leading these diverse workforces. And they will be the leaders who can show up way more inclusively than the leaders you and I experienced in our career. So this is really powerful, because we're unpacking what it's like, right? And speaking truth to power. When you heard those stories, you probably were like, oh my gosh. You know, I've told stories to white male counterparts in corporate, and it's blown their mind. You know, my husband, we live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and we have nice home, a nice car. And my husband was pulled over. He's African American, was pulled over while driving black. You know, basically was it, you know? So to relate that story, I shared that story with a peer, white male peer, who lives in a similar neighborhood, you know, coming from a similar income. Everything about us is very similar. Where we were in our career, the money we were making, how we were able to provide for our families. And to hear that happens to my husband, and happened regularly to him when we first moved here, was astounding to him. Because again, that's his blind spot. That's not his reality. That doesn't happen. He can't imagine that happens to someone that he sees as an equal in me. You know, so we have to tell those stories. So this is really powerful. I appreciate the platform that you're giving folks like me and others to speak about these issues.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. I know one of the things I think about when I have these conversations is the sustainability piece. And I guess my default mode is like a character flaw. I'm kind of a pessimist, but I just want to make sure that it sticks. And that's why I'm like, I want to keep having these conversations. When you think about sustainability in a company, what are your thoughts about building that, you know, stable and sustainable future of DEI?
Yeah, you know, I think, especially in this environment, and I don't mean just what we've seen from a social injustice perspective, but what we've seen during this pandemic, in terms of, you know, the pandemic was colorblind. We saw impact across the board, more so for some of our marginalized communities, but it impacted everyone. And additionally, it brought organizations to kind of this equalizing place where CEO, frontline employee, we're all doing Zoom now. We're all trying to balance, how do we help our kids through this moment, their homework and life, while we're also trying to sustain our careers. So in many ways, this time is a great equalizer. And one of the things I always explain, you know, to the women I coach or when I'm speaking, the future of work is all about change and how change can breed opportunity. And if we can really embrace that when we have these moments, these most difficult times in our lives, if we look for the opportunity, so don't be the pessimist, think about, and I'm a glass half empty person too. And so this was a mindset shift that I had to embrace in my own career. And I talk about it a little bit in the book, that change does breed opportunity. It's a matter of how we reframe our mindset. So when I think about the future of work, the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I do think that the organizations who kind of follow that model of mission, plan, and accountability will have sustainable impact. I also think it takes truly just a growth mindset, really focusing on what can I learn in this moment? A lot of people, especially when I talk to executives, especially early in my diversity career, they wanted me to give them the formula, right? Tell me everything I need to know about Black people, Asian people. That's not the conversation. That isn't even it. It is about seeking to understand, being open to difference, and finding value in things that are different than we are. That's it. You don't have to know. You don't have to know everything about me, Jimmy, as a Black woman, and I don't have to know everything about you as a white male. But if you stay open and curious and accepting of difference, that's all it takes, right? Because when you're well-intentioned, back to the conversation about intentionality, if we lead from a place of a well-intentioned head and heart, then we can't go wrong, because we'll ask those questions, we'll be open to each other, and then we learn and do better. We can't unlearn what we experience. So learn it, do better. It's really simple. I think executives, they have a lot of pressure on them, the folks that lead these organizations. And when we think about a sustainable future, nobody wants to make a mistake. Nobody wants to get it wrong. Nobody wants to be tone deaf to the issues. You don't have to know it all. What you have to be is curious and well-intentioned and willing to change. That's it.
The growth mindset part really speaks to me. I think I can connect with that, and like also the idea of continuous improvement. Like there's not necessarily there's not like an endpoint. It's just this living, breathing thing that you're constantly improving on.
Right. That's exactly it. And I mean, we can even take that formula of mission, plan, and accountability to a personal level. Why does this matter to you? Like you mentioned, you have daughters, right? You want to see the world a better place for your children, and for them to not have some of the struggles that exist maybe for your wife or someone like me. So that's your mission. What's your plan? To learn. I'm just gonna learn what I can. And how are you going to be accountable? When I know better, I'll do better. When I see that someone else could be informed better, I'll inform them, and I'll do my part. It doesn't have to be a grandiose thing, right? It just requires a growth mindset, a willingness to learn and change.
Absolutely. Love it. So speaking of growth mindset, I would like to zoom out a little bit toward the end here, and just ask you, what's the vision for this chapter of your professional life as as a business owner and a consultant and an author? What are you looking forward to? Those kinds of things.
I just want to be, my whole purpose is to be a source of affirmation, like we talked about, inspiration and strength for other women. And sometimes that comes through the direct work I do coaching or speaking. And other times it comes through consulting with organizations on diversity and how they can do better. And that lifts the women and everyone in the organization. So when I think about where I'm going in this space, I don't have a big plan to become rich. I don't have a big plan to become a huge organization. I just want to partner with people and companies who want to do good work. They're well-intentioned, again, from the head and the heart, and they want to do the best that they can in this space. So if I can impact just one woman who can connect to her authenticity and her value, and she can go forth and lead and achieve the success she defines, that's success for me. So yeah, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, impacting one woman, one small business, whatever I can do, Maybe if one person hears this and goes, oh my God, I can do this differently, then I'm going to claim that as success.
Yeah, I think this episode will have been a huge success by that
I hope
metric.
so.
The last question I ask everyone is, what is the kindest thing someone has done for you at work or just work related? So it could be a coworker, a boss,
You
any kind of
know,
opportunity.
this is a difficult question for me because it's easy, but it's also difficult. So my answer to that, the kindest thing comes in a person. There was a woman who worked, she worked for me, but I never like to say that. I work with people. Her name is Donna Stout, and she was my assistant. And the kindest thing that ever happened for me is that she cared about me and she took care of me. So I think that so often, especially executives who get the luxury of having someone who schedules their appointments and keeps the troublemakers from coming making their way to their door, or keeps them focused, or even gets you lunch when your head's down in the work. To have someone like that is a privilege, but then to have someone like Donna who not only did that, but she cared about me. She actually cared about my health, my well-being, and she took care of me. And so in that way, I never would have thought that I would find caring and love at work. And that was her. And so she was someone who lived her purpose. And I admire her tremendously. I have stayed close to her. She's like a sister to me. And that's what the kindest thing that ever happened is I got the privilege of having Donna Stout as my assistant. That was the kindest thing that ever happened to me.
I love that. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
I did, I want to end on how people can find you online and, learn more about you, your business, and especially your book. So whatever the best way for folks to find you.
Yeah. So, one of the easiest ways to just get on my mailing list. So you can text empowered to 55444. Or you can just look me up on LinkedIn, Tracy J. Edmonds, my website, tracyjedmonds.com, Instagram, Tracy J. Edmonds. So I'm out there, Facebook and all of that. But yeah, if you want to get on my mailing list, just text empowered to 55444 and that'll do it.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure we include that in the episode description and the show notes and everywhere else. So
thank you.
Tracy, this has been awesome. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the audience has too, and will continue to do so. So thanks so much for your time.
And thank you for what you're doing. I can't say enough. I think emerging leaders need to get the opportunity to get exposed to others who have scraped their knees or been successful or whatever it is, so that they can chart a path forward that changes the world. They're the future leaders.
That's right. Thanks for everything you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Tracy. Bye.
Bye.